Imagine walking into a bookstore right now. You see these massive tables stacked high with vibrant, colorful covers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the really bright, eye-catching that are everywhere.
Exactly. You see cash registers ringing nonstop. And, if you look at the actual industry data, it shows millions of books flying off the shelves.
Right.
And this is driven largely by a massive, super dedicated readership of women. So by every standard metric of capitalism, you are looking at an industry that is just thriving.
Totally booming.
But what if you were to look at that exact same picture, the sales, the demographic dominance, the endless rows of bestsellers, and declare that fiction, as a cultural force, is completely dead?
I mean, it's a staggering contradiction to present, isn't it? To literally look at peak commercial success and then diagnose it as a terminal cultural decline.
It really is. And that is exactly what we are looking at today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, our mission is unpacking a highly provocative, deeply opinionated, essay-style video from the YouTube channel Echo Chamberlain. And the title of this video really pulls no punches at all.
No, it certainly does not.
It is called Progressive White Women Have Ruined Fiction.
Yeah. It's a title designed to instantly polarize the room. And honestly, it does exactly what it sets out to do.
It really does. And because of that, before we go a single step further, we need to establish some very clear ground rules for you, the listener, as we embark on this specific deep dive.
Absolutely essential.
Today's source material contains highly politically charged commentary. I mean, it touches on explosive cultural touchstones, gender dynamics, cultural ownership, identity politics, and, well, the fundamental value of different types of art.
Right. We are venturing into territory where people have very deeply held, very personal convictions.
Which makes this a crucial moment to state up front.
Mm-hmm.
We, as your guides through this material, are not taking sides.
At all. We are not here to endorse the creator's viewpoints, nor are we here to condemn them.
Absolutely not. We are acting purely as impartial guides today. Our job is to break down the creator's central arguments, to identify the specific evidence he uses to build his case, and basically to help you understand the exact cultural critique being leveled in this video.
Precisely. We just want to understand what is being said, the structural logic of how it is being argued, and why this creator believes this represents an existential crisis in modern fiction.
Right. And as I was reading through the transcript of his essay, a framing device kept popping into my head. I think it'll really help us navigate this whole conversation.
Oh, what is it?
It's the tension between the mirror and the window.
The mirror and the window. I like that. Expand on that a bit.
Well, it seems to me that modern publishing, generally speaking, believes books should function as mirrors. Like, the ultimate goal is for the reader to open a book and see themselves,
Right. To feel validated, to feel seen.
Exactly. To have their identity reflected back at them. But this creator, Echo Chamberlain, he operates from the fundamental belief that books must be windows.
Meaning you aren't supposed to see yourself.
Right. You are supposed to look through the glass at an alien lens, a strange moral system, something completely outside of your own experience.
That makes a lot of sense.
And his core thesis is that the literary world has fundamentally traded in its cultural resonance, what he actually calls the Zeitgeist, because it basically smashed all the windows and replaced them with mirror.
That is a highly effective way to frame his underlying philosophy. And, the engine driving this decline, according to his thesis, the reason all the windows were replaced, is a massive, unchecked demographic shift in the publishing industry itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly does he mean by a demographic shift?
He argues that progressive white women now dominate publishing at every single level. We are talking literary agents, publishers, marketing departments, acquisitions editors, and ultimately the readers themselves.
Okay, let's look at the numbers he uses to back this up, because he does bring stats.
He does.
He cites a statistic that broader U.S. publishing, reviewing, and agency staff are reported as being 72.5% female.
Which is huge.
Yeah, 72.5% is not a marginal majority. That is an overwhelming supermajority.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need to explain the mechanics. How does an echo chamber practically function in a publishing house, not just a passive statistic, right?
Right. We really have to look at the pipeline of how a book goes from a Word document to a physical object on a shelf. It starts in the slush pile, or the inbox of a literary agent.
The gatekeepers.
Exactly. If 72.5% of those agents share a similar demographic background, educational background, and cultural world, they act as the very first sieve. They inevitably filter out narratives that don't resonate with their ability.
So an author writes a manuscript with a harsh, unfamiliar moral system, a window, basically, and the agent reads it and says, I don't connect with this character. I don't feel seen.
Exactly. And even if it magically gets past it then goes to acquisitions editors at the major publishing houses. Those editors have to take the book to an acquisitions meet and convince a room that is statistically likely to be dominated by that exact same 70.5% demographic, that this book is worth a major financial.
And they have to argue that the marketing department, which also largely shares that demographic, will know how to sell it.
Precisely. The creator's argument hinges on the idea that when an industry is dominated to that extent by one specific demographic, it inevitably creates an ideological monoculture.
It shapes what gets bought, what gets promoted, and ultimately what gets read by the public.
Yeah. And this demographic shift, from his perspective, has resulted in some very specific literary trends that he finds deeply problematic.
Right, and the first major trend he targets is the handling of morality, specifically what he describes as the framing of banal sexual promiscuity as a form of empowering feminism.
And he brings receipts for this claim. He doesn't just make an abstract assertion. He points directly to recent, highly visible examples.
Let's get into those examples.
He starts with a novel called All Fours. He notes that this book wasn't just published, it was ubiquitous. Like, it was on the main table at every bookstore, heavily promoted by the industry as a defining text.
Right, let's break down the mechanics of the plot in All Fours as he presents it. The protagonist is a middle-aged, semi-famous creative who uses they-them pronouns.
Okay.
And this character decides to cheat on their husband with both men and women. But what Echo Chamberlain really zeroes in on isn't the infidelity itself, it's the internal monologue of the character regarding the infidelity.
How the character justifies it.
Exactly. He quotes the protagonist pondering, "Was this the secret to everything, this bodily freedom?" The character describes this promiscuity as feeling intuitive and healthy, as if it were their birthright.
Wow. Intuitive and healthy and a birthright. Think about the weight of those words for a second.
It's heavy.
The creator is highlighting how the narrative is structuring infidelity, not as a character flaw, not as a messy human mistake, but as a profound philosophical triumph. And he then brings up another book to establish that this is a systemic trend, not just an isolated instance. He points to Lauren Elkin's novel Scaffolding, which again was on many prestigious lists for the best or most popular book of the year.
Oh, and he makes a very pointed, sarcastic comment about the setting of Scaffolding, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He says it takes place in Paris, because of course it does.
Yeah, which is his way of flagging a bourgeois cliche right off the bat. So in Scaffolding, multiple women are cheating on their husbands and partners.
Okay.
He highlights a specific passage where a main character thinks, "I am sleeping with a man who is not my husband, and I refuse to feel shamed for it." The character claims this is what they've been fighting for. Quote, "Love and sex and bodies without shame," and that she is laying claim.
So we have these two highly celebrated books where infidelity and promiscuity are presented as like profound feminist victories. They are ideological triumphs of the protagonist casting off patriarchal restriction. Now, here's where the creator introduces a massive hypothetical to point out what he sees as a glaring double standard in this 72.5% female-dominated industry.
The gender flip scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He asks the audience to imagine a gender flip scenario.
He uses the controversial French author Michel Houellebecq as an example.
Oh, Houellebecq.
Right. Houellebecq is famous for writing deeply cynical, often misanthropic male protagonists who engage in very emotionally detached sexual encounters.
So what's the hypothetical?
The creator argues that if a male author like Houellebecq wrote a male protagonist who cheated on his wife and then earnestly described his morally empty promiscuity as intuitive and healthy and his birthright, the publishing establishment would utterly reject it.
He claims it wouldn't even get past the inboxes of those literary agents who, he characterizes as urban, progressive white women in their 20s to 40s. He argues that if a man wrote this exact same internal monologue, it would be derided as trenchantly indifferent, nihilistic, and sociopath.
Yep. It would be dismissed as a stale, dated display of a complete lack of emotion.
What is truly fascinating about his critique here is his frustration with the earnestness of these modern novels.
The lack of irony.
Yeah, he explicitly states that All Fours isn't presented as ironic. It isn't a meta-commentary on the selfishness of modern creative. It is written completely earnestly.
Which drives him crazy.
He sees a hypocritical framework being established by the industry. The idea that because generations of women were historically held back, modern female characters are somehow morally entitled to engage in what he calls a degenerative promiscuous viva.
Wait, let's pause on the exact phrasing he uses in the video because it reveals a lot about the cultural lens he is applying here.
Oh, absolutely.
He talks about these characters shamelessly sleeping around while they're, and this is a direct quote, cucked husbands sit idly by at home, either unaware or obliging.
Yeah, that word cucked.
That is not a standard literary critique term. That is highly loaded internet slang with deep roots in right-wing manosphere politics. By using that specific word, he's signaling a very specific type of cultural grievance, isn't he?
It is an incredibly loaded term, and it does exactly what you're suggesting. It frames the literary trope not just as bad writing, but as a form of active humiliation directed at masculinity.
Exactly.
He isn't just saying these books are poorly constructed. He's suggesting they are fundamentally hostile to men, portraying male partners as weak, emasculated props in the protagonist's journey of self-actualization.
And to further dismantle the supposed bravery of these narratives, he brings in a historical count. He mentions Anais Nin,
The famous 20th century diarist.
right, known for her extensive, explicit writings on female sexuality and infidelity. His point with Anais Nin is essentially, we've already done that.
Right.
He claims that Anais Nin thought, acted out, and wrote extensively about all of this stuff decades before these modern authors.
So he's saying it's not even new.
Exactly. From his viewpoint, this reveals a dreary lack of historical literary awareness in the current publishing monoculture. These modern books are being marketed as revolutionary, boundary-pushing explorations of the female psyche, but he argues they're just repeating history.
Repeating it without any of the intellectual self-awareness or genuine shock value that actually existed in the mid-20th century.
Right. So essentially, the creator is arguing that modern publishing has constructed an ideological walled garden. In this garden, certain behaviors, like infidelity, are celebrated as empowering if performed by the preferred demographic, but would be condemned as toxic sociopathic behavior if performed by anyone else.
Okay, let's unpack this even further. Is the creator saying these books are inherently bad, or just that they are hypocritical in how they are marketed as groundbreaking?
I think he's saying both, honestly. It's a critique of institutional hypocrisy, but that critique of how empowerment is handled is actually just the outer layer for him.
There's more.
Much more. It quickly bleeds into his broader, much more sweeping frustration with how modern authors handle another massive, omnipresent theme in today's culture.
Right, because once you establish a framework where demographic traits dictate moral righteousness, it inevitably infects how authors construct their characters' entire existence.
Suddenly, the plot isn't the point anymore. The character's identity plot.
And the creator makes a very bold claim. He argues that modern female authors don't just include identity in their work. They make identity the entire point of their writing.
He describes this as a process that becomes overwrought, repetitive, and incredibly on the nose. He uses a very evocative metaphor. He says these authors can't stop themselves from filling their books with great heavy shovels of identity until it begins to look like self-parody.
Great heavy shovels of identity. Wow. That implies it's not a subtle threading of a theme. It's a blunt force application. It's like pouring concrete over the narrative.
And again, he brings receipts. He points to Zaina Arafat's debut novel, You Exist Too Much. Let's trace the narrative arc of that book as he summarizes it, because he views it as a prime example of this phenomenon.
Okay, lay it out for us.
It starts with a 12-year-old Palestinian-American girl on a hot day in Bethlehem. She's yelled at by a group of men outside the Church of the Nativity because she exposed her leg, an act they consider forbidden in a biblical city.
Okay.
When she later admits to her mother that her mother responds with a phrase that only deepens her cultural and familial shame, telling her, "You exist too much."
Hence the title of the book.
Exactly. And the narrative follows this protagonist from being a blushing teen to becoming a sought-after DJ and an aspiring writer moving to Brooklyn.
And Chamberlain adds a little sarcastic, of course she does,
Yeah.
regarding the move to Brooklyn, right?
Yes, again, highlighting what he sees as a predictable, almost algorithmically generated cliche for this type of literature. So she moves in with her first serious girlfriend, but her hidden longings explode into reckless romantic encounters.
And ultimately, her desire to stop her own destructive impulses leads her to a treatment center called The Ledge, which identifies her core affliction as love addiction.
He also brings up a second narrative to prove his point, focusing on a trans woman named Reese. Reese had what the creator calls mundane bourgeois comfort, an apartment in New York, a job she didn't hate, a loving relationship with her partner, Amy.
So she had what previous generations of trans women could only dream of, basically.
Right. But then her girlfriend, Amy, detransitions, becomes Ames, and everything falls apart. The fallout is undeniably messy. Reese is caught in a self-destructive pattern, avoiding her loneliness by sleeping with married men.
And Ames isn't happy either, right?
No, Ames thought detransitioning to live as a man would make life easier, but it cost him his relationship with Reese.
So we have these two highly specific, highly marginalized narratives summarized by the creator. Now here is the critical analytical part. How does the publishing industry view these messy, chaotic storylines? And how does Echo Chamberlain view them?
Well, the industry, the authors, and the admirers, according to the creator, view the muddles, the conceits, and the whirlwind nature of the character's circumstance as possessing an essential drop ironic play.
Meaning they see it as a complex, nuanced, perhaps darkly comedic exploration of modern life and trauma.
Exact. But Chamberlain absolutely refuses to accept that framing. He shuts it down completely. He says, no, it's just a cheap cut-up fix for identity junk.
Let's pause on that phrase too, identity junkies.
It is a brutal, deeply cynical assessment. He is essentially arguing that these books are functioning like a narcotic for a very specific type of reader.
Wow.
He believes that in these narratives, actual narrative substance, profound character development, true literary friction have been entirely replaced by a checklist of correct politics, marginalization, trauma.
So he views these books as dispensing dopamine hits of validation to readers who are addicted to seeing their own or allied demographic markers centered in a narrative.
Precise.
So what does this all mean? If we look at this through his lens, what happens to a culture when its literature becomes, as he later calls it, an autopsy of identity?
An autopsy is a fascinating choice of word there. It implies dissecting something that is already dead, examining its parts in an isolated clinical.
It was a very vivid image.
He feels that instead of building living, breathing narratives that challenge us, modern authors are just clinically dissecting their own demographic markers and traumas on the page purely for therapeutic validation. It's the difference between art and a diary in his eyes.
But, I mean, I have to push back on his framing here because this feels intellectually inconsistent. If you look at classic literature, the literature he presumably revered, isn't identity almost always at the core?
That's a fair point.
I mean, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man is fundamentally an autopsy of racial identity in America.
Yeah.
F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby is an autopsy of class identity. Why does the creator draw such a hard, unforgiving line, labeling this specific modern focus on identity as a cheap fix? Isn't he just objecting to the types of identity being explored, specifically queer, female, and trans identity, rather than the concept of exploring identity itself?
That is the exact tension, and really the weak point in his argument that a critic would immediately attack. But if we try to steelman his position based on the essay, he would likely counter that class-explored identity as a gateway to universal human or immense societal.
So, like, Gatsby's class identity is a vehicle to critique the hollow rod of the American dream, which applies to everyone.
Yes, he perceives these modern novels as treating identity as the destination, not the vehicle. He argues that the exploration stops at the boundary of the author's own demographic mark, seeking only empathy and validation of the reader, rather than pushing the reader into uncomfortable universal territory.
So he's saying Gatsby is a window into a corrupt society, but You Exist Too Much is just a mirror for the author's specific trauma.
Exactly. And this qualitative judgment he's made, this rigid distinction between high art that challenges and therapeutic validation that coddles, leads directly into how he addresses the most common data-driven defense of the modern public.
Right, because whenever the modern publishing industry is criticized for its output, whenever someone says books aren't culturally relevant anymore, the industry has a massive shield to hide behind.
The sales numbers.
The defense is raw data. The defense is, well, you can complain all you want, but at least women are reading. The industry is financially healthy because statistically, women read significantly more books than men do. They literally keep the lights on in the publish.
And the creator tackles this defense head on. He doesn't deny the statistics at all. He acknowledges that it's entirely true women are reading more, but he counters this by invoking what he calls the old chestnut of quality versus quantity.
Okay.
He argues that what modern women readers are consuming ain't so hot in terms of quality.
And to illustrate this lack of quality, he takes aim at the absolute zenith of the bestseller list. He targets Colleen Hoover, the author of It Ends With Us.
The biggest of the big.
Yeah, he calls her the queen bee of mediocre reading at the.
What's strategically interesting about his critique of Hoover is that he doesn't just attack her prose as an outside elitist, he actually uses her own words against the industry.
Oh, how?
He points out that Hoover's immense world-beating success stems from what he calls a normcore style. He quotes Hoover herself explaining why being a mediocre writer is actually perfectly fine with her.
Yeah, the quotes he pulls from her interviews are fascinating in the context of this debate. She explicitly says, I'm not some highbrow literary writer. I write just fun books that are easy reads.
She owns it.
She openly admits she doesn't want to impress people with her writing skills. She says she could probably spend more time crafting intricate sentences and complex metaphors, but she doesn't enjoy reading that kind of writing, so she simply doesn't write it. She wants to write what she likes to read.
And then she throws down a massive challenge to her literary critics, doesn't she?
She does. She says, could they write a better book? Probably. Have they? Probably not.
It's an incredible defense of pure commercial. And Chamberlain is using Hoover as the ultimate, undeniable evidence that the female-dominated reading market actively rewards a lack of literary ambition.
Right.
To him, her multi-million copy success isn't a triumph of getting people engaged with the written word. It's a symptom of a market that aggressively prefers cognitive ease over intellectual sub. And he uses this premise to completely attempt to adjust the narrative around those readings that we mentioned.
He argues that the problem lies in the raw numbers, specifically what is being read to generate those numbers. He acknowledges the quantity, but claims that this more is made up to a massive degree by what he calls shallow dross.
Gross crap, I think he calls it.
Yeah. And then he breaks down the genres to prove his point.
Okay.
I think we need to list these out to fully grasp the hierarchy he is building.
Let's do it. He starts from the bottom up, listing the genres most frequently purchased and read by women. The list includes romance, historical romance, contemporary romance, women's fiction, chick lit, paranormal romance, adult fiction, erotica, children's picture book, contemporary fantasy, books about animals, food and drink, cookbooks, young adult male-male romance, and magic fantasy.
It is a massive wall of highly commercial, primarily romance, domestic, and lifestyle-focused genres.
Yes.
Then he contrasts this by starting from the top with the genres that men typically prefer and buy. His list for men includes philosophy, comics, politics, graphic novels, science fiction, history, religion, science, literature, horror, classic, nonfiction, reference, novels, biography, adventure, and psychology.
The juxtaposition he sets up is incredibly stark and intense. He is contrasting highly emotional, romantic, or domestic genres preferred by women with historical, scientific, and philosophical genres preferred by men.
It's a very calculated comparison.
And he uses this breakdown to perform what he calls a hypothetical recalculation of the
Right. He notes that the original overall implicit reading split is generally understood to be roughly 65 to 75% female to 25 to 35% male. Women clearly, undeniably read more.
by a wide margin.
But then he asks a highly manipulative question. What happens if we hypothetically remove the bottom 15 categories that he labels as dross crap?
He estimates that without doing a full weighted recalculation, if you simply remove those commercial genres from the data set, the ratio shifts dramatically. It becomes roughly 55 to 60% female and 40 to 45%. The massive gap practically even.
But hold on, if we look at those reading stats,
Right.
removing 15 massive commercial genres just to make the male to female ratio look even is a massive statistical manipulation. You can't just delete the data you don't like to prove a point. Does he actually justify that mathematically?
He doesn't justify it mathematically, he justifies it philosophically. He drives this point home incredibly. He asserts that in the current environment, claiming that women are doing most of the reading is like saying people who go to McDonald's, Subway, and Taco Bell are doing most of the...
Wow. Okay. That is a highly aggressive analogy.
It really is.
He is entirely dismissing vast swaths of commercial fiction as intellectual junk food. He's saying, yes, technically they are consuming word, just like eating a Big Mac is consuming calories, but it provides absolutely no literary or cultural nutrition.
That's his argument in a nutshell.
But I have to challenge this premise. Does the creator leave any room whatsoever for reading purely for entertainment? Must all valid literature serve a higher intellectual purpose? Because he is establishing an extreme, rigid hierarchy of value here.
Very rigid.
He's essentially saying that reading a romance novel or a cookbook shouldn't even count as reading in a statistical sense when evaluating the health of our literary culture.
Based on the essay, he clearly does not believe they belong in the same conversation. For him, reading a cookbook or a paranormal romance does not contribute to the zeitgeist, and therefore it is irrelevant to the cultural health of literature. He believes the sheer volume of this dross is actively drowning out serious literature. The oxygen in the room is being consumed by junk.
And if the statistics show a massive market appetite for comfort over challenge, you would expect to see that reflected not just in the words on the page, but in the physical packaging of the book, the product design itself.
Which brings us to a fascinating part of his argument, his highly visual, almost visceral critique of the physical bookstore space.
Yes, he moves from statistical analysis to the actual retail environment. He paints a picture of a bookstore that has been completely overtaken by aesthetics designed for social media, specifically book talk.
He jokes that you have to go into modern bookstores wearing the heavy Oppenheimer atom bomb goggles, you know, the deeply tinted ones they used during the nuclear tests in the 90s.
That's hilarious.
He says if you don't wear them, your retinas will literally be burnt out by the harshly vivid, neon, aggressively cliched book covers that dominate.
It's a humorous exaggeration, but he's pointing to a very real, very observable phenomenon, right? The algorithmically driven standardization of book cover.
Exactly. The industry has figured out exactly what colors and shapes catch the eye of a scroller on a smartphone screen, and they've applied it universally.
And then he hones in on specific narrative trope that he claims this demographic has cloned to death. First, he targets the trend of Greek mythology. He claims modern white women have put Greek mythology in a chokehold.
A chokehold so tight, he says, that the ancient past begins to turn blue, then purple. He is completely exhausted by the sheer volume of feminist retellings of myth.
And he lists a dizzying array of nearly identical pitches to prove his point. A feminist retelling of Clytemnestra, a reimagining of Aeneas and the woman left at the fringes of his story, a powerful feminist retelling of Phaedra.
It just keeps going.
A mesmerizing retelling of Theseus from the perspective of Ariadne, a dazzling feminist retelling of Medusa, framing her as the victim of the men who made her a monster.
The repetition in his list, highly intense. He wants the listener to feel the exhaustion of the algorithm. But then he pivots to something he finds even more dully repetitive, something he says borders on literal factory line cloning.
What's that?
World War II historical fiction covers.
Oh, right. Now, in his essay, he spends an inordinate amount of time listing variations of a woman facing away on a balcony with planes in the sky, a woman in Paris facing away with 3 planes, a woman on a bicycle facing away with 2 planes, a woman in London facing away. It goes on and on.
It does.
But let's elevate this past just a visual gag. Why are these covers happening? What is the sociological or algorithmic reason that the industry is relentlessly churning out silhouettes of women facing away from the reader?
That is the crucial question. When a character on a cover is facing away, they lack specific facial features, they become an avatar.
An empty vessel.
Exactly. An empty vessel that the reader can easily slip into. It allows the reader to project their own identity onto the protagonist before they even open the book. It is the ultimate manifestation of the mirror concept you brought up earlier. The cover is literally designed to reflect the reader, not to present a distinct, challenging other.
That makes perfect sense. And furthermore, why the obsession with World War II? Think about the era we are living in right now in the 2020. We have profound economic anxiety, pandemic fatigue, political polarization.
It's a chaotic time.
Is it possible that the 72.5% demographic and the readers they serve are gravitating toward World War II narratives because it represents a time of stark, unambiguous moral clarity? The Nazis were bad, the Allies are good, and the heroine resisting them is undeniably righteous. It's a low-stakes way to experience high stakes.
That's a brilliant sociological read. It provides the thrill of danger but guarantees a morally comforting resolution. But to echo Chamberlain, this desire for moral comfort is exactly the problem.
Why?
He argues that an industry dominated by a single demographic isn't just producing content he disagrees with. It's producing content that is aesthetically, intellectually, and creatively bankrupt. It's an assembly line of predictable tropes designed to soothe, not to provoke.
And all of these critiques we've discussed so far, the focus on identity as a therapeutic autopsy, the defense of mediocre genre reading habits, the algorithmic cloning of tropes and faceless book covers, these are all just symptoms.
Yes, just symptoms.
They're the symptoms of what the creator views as his central, most sweeping, and most devastating diagnosis: the complete and utter death of the zeitgeist.
This is the crux, the philosophical beating heart of the entire essay. The creator states definitively, without an ounce of hesitation, that women can't do zeitgeist as well as men.
Okay, that is an incredibly provocative, highly flammable statement. To even begin to unpack it, we have to understand exactly how he defines the word zeitgeist. Because he acknowledges that the term gets thrown around casually in marketing meetings to just mean whatever is popular right now or whatever is trending on Twitter. But he says that definition completely misses the electricity and the danger of the concept.
For the creator, true literary zeitgeist isn't about popularity or sales figures. It is about blending the extreme with the high literary. He argues that classic high-functioning fiction derives its cultural power from forcing the reader to encounter something that does not relate easily to the self.
Maybe.
It requires presenting an alien moral system or an unfamiliar psychology.
An alien moral system. That brings us right back to the window versus the mirror. He says you must adjust to the text. You don't immediately want to or try to recognize yourself in it. It is the exact opposite of looking for a mirror or seeking validation.
To anchor this very abstract definition, he sets 3 specific examples of authors who he believes wielded true zeitgeist.
Who are they?
First, he points to Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. He argues this book isn't just about feelings or relationships. It's a terrifying exploration of bioethics, the instrumentalization of human life, and a quiet, polite totalitarian. He says the emotional core of that book lands specifically because the conceptual frame, the alien moral system, is so stark and challenging.
Okay.
Then he cites Cormac McCarthy, noting his ability to blend brutal, unsparing Gothic violence with incredibly high literary almost biblical prose. Finally, Vladimir Nabokov, who he says could absolutely mess with your head, implicate you in horrible things, and do it all with exquisite, undeniable.
These are all authors who force the reader into uncomfortable, friction-filled spaces.
Exactly. And to solidify his point, Chamberlain provides a historical timeline of the literary zeitgeist as he sees it to show us exactly what we have lost.
Let's walk through that time.
He points first to the era of Saul Bellow and Philip Roth. He notes they had immense cultural prominence because of their immense, they could cover profound moral seriousness, moral trauma, alongside manic comedy, sexual candor, intellectual anxiety.
Right.
He highlights their very particular blend of self-interrogation and swagger, which he says became almost synonymous with the American literary novel.
And then he moves to the 1980s, which he describes as a strangely glamorous, high-stakes version of the literary world. This was an era where the novelist was a public intellectual, a provocateur, and a celebrity simultaneously.
Who does he mention?
He mentions figures like Salman Rushdie, Ian McEwan, and Martin A.
He paints a picture of a booming decade with massive advances in literary parties that blurred into mainstream media events. Publishing houses behaved like record labels, chasing the next defining, dangerous voice.
Yet these authors embodied a specific literary cool. They were erudite but deeply provocative, formally ambitious, yet deeply embedded in the cultural bloodstream. Their work didn't just sit politely on a shelf, right?
Right. It circulated through dinner parties, angry reviews, and national political argument. It was how an educated class understood itself and fought with itself.
He then tracks the zeitgeist into the 90s and early 2000s, where he says it migrated into something raw, more fractured, and more subcultural. He points to Irvine Welsh's Trainspotting.
Great example of friction.
Yeah, he calls it drug-soaked, unapologetically local in its dialect, yet globally led. It had a different kind of authority, a grimy immediacy. It was dangerous, and therefore it was cool to be seen reading it. Through all these eras, despite the changes in style, the novel kept reasserting itself as a vital way of feeling out the friction of the present.
But then we arrive at his view of the present day, and his verdict is that this era of the zeitgeist, this era of the dangerous, friction-filled novel, is completely gone. He claims that contemporary literary fiction, driven by that 72.5% demographic of female literary email authors, has entirely lost the heat of the zeitgeist.
He argues that contemporary literary culture is trapped in a closed loop, a loop of progressive self-analysis, sexual and political confession, body discourse, therapeutic identity fragmentation, and what he calls clever, neurotic disassembly.
Right.
He points out that most everyday folks outside the tiny insulated bubble of literary festivals don't know any major zeitgeist-defining novelists anymore simply because the industry refuses to publish.
He argues that zeitgeist depends on a broader consensus of cool, a sense that both men and women recognize that something important, slightly dangerous, is happening in culture. And here's where he unpacks his theory on why this death.
Why did the industry abandon the barbell for the spa?
He blames the massive shift in how younger generations consume media. He says teens who grew up with internet content that is algorithmically curated to validate their feelings, protect their triggers, and mirror their worldviews inevitably expect fiction to do the exact same thing.
They expect validation without friction.
Exactly. They expect what he calls smoothed out modes of consumption.
Basically, he's viewing literature like physical exercise. If you just go to a spa to be pampered, to be told you are valid and good, you feel great in the moment, but you don't build any muscle. You don't grow.
Yeah.
He's saying modern fiction is a spa. But true art needs to be a heavy barbell. It has to hurt a little bit to work.
That's a perfect analogy for his argument.
Therefore, contemporary fiction just welcomes you to locate yourself within it. Protagonists are designed as perfectly tailored vessels of identity for the reader to wear. He scathingly notes that in this ghastly state of things, writers and editors like to imagine that exploring identity is the zeitgeist. But he insists furiously that identity is not zeitgeist.
And this leads to his final dire warning to the publishing industry regarding the loss of male reader. He says the industry cannot sit around, shrug its shoulders, and wonder why literary fiction has lost its cultural power and why men have stopped.
So what's his solution for getting men back?
He argues that young men in particular crave intensely authorial, personality-driven voice. They want personas in work that is unstable, charismatic, excessive, sometimes appalling, and often they want the barbell.
He says if you give young men more of that unstable, appalling, charismatic friction, they will read more. They will return to the bookstore. But if you keep producing autopsies of identity, trauma, embodiment, and politics, they will stay away.
It is a devastating systemic critique of the current.
So, just to make sure I am fully grasping the magnitude of his claim here, the creator is essentially arguing that smooth consumption, this profound modern desire to feel safe, validated, has killed the cultural impact of the novel. Is he genuinely saying that for a book to matter, for it to possess true zeitgeist, it must be somewhat hostile to its...
Yes, that is precisely what he is. True art, in his view, is an encounter with, not a reflection of the self. If you are merely validated by a book, you haven't been challenged, you haven't been forced to grapple with a different moral reality, and therefore the culture hasn't been moved forward one inch. It's just a closed, profitable loop.
That makes his stance crystal clear.
And what is brilliant, rhetorically speaking, about this video is that the creator doesn't just complain about the problem from the sideline. He actually provides a blueprint of the exact kind of challenging, uncomfortable fiction he...
Right. He puts his money where his mouth is. He ends the video by pitching his own antidote to the problem. He pitches his own work of literary fiction, specifically his latest book titled Variations on a Theme.
Let's look at the plot he outlines for his own book to see if it holds up to his own rigid...
Let's do it.
It follows a character named Danny O'Neill, who is an English lecturer. The story is split between two timelines. In the summer of 1989, a 17-year-old Danny was drawn in the ex-driven, chaotic hedonism of London's rave. He fell under the influence of a circle of much older cultural elite who used drugs and status to exploit him and his friends.
Then, the narrative jumps forward 30 years to the present day. Danny maintains, fiercely, that he was not abused. He insists to himself and others that it was a different time, and that he was a willing participant.
Right.
But the Crown Prosecution Service is building a case that would place Danny at the center of a massive, high-profile historical abuse trial. An old friend urges him to get in touch with the others from that summer, forcing Danny to confront the deeply distressing, long-term consequences of their experiences.
And the core dramatic question of his book, the psychological engine driving it, as he presents it, is this: how can someone believe almost their entire life that they were not abused and then change their mind?
This pitch serves as the ultimate thesis statement for everything we spent the last hour discussing. Look at what he's doing here. This plot perfectly mirrors his demands for what fiction should be.
Exactly. It isn't a simple story of trauma with a clear victim and a clear oppressor. It tackles complex, uncomfortable moral ambiguity. It deals with retrospective justice and unsettling psychological shifts regarding consent.
It's messy.
Very messy. It forces the reader to navigate intense friction rather than offering a simple, validating, progressive identity. He is offering the unstable, compelling, slightly appalling narrative that he claims the 72.5% demographic pressing.
It's a fascinating conclusion to an incredibly combative argument. So, to synthesize the journey we've just been on today, we have explored a perspective that argues a massive demographic shift in publishing, specifically to an overwhelming white female majority, has fundamentally altered the DNA of the literary landscape.
Right.
Echo Chamberlain argues that this shift has replaced intellectually challenging, culturally resonant zeitgeist literature with algorithmic validation. He claims it has elevated dross commercial genres to undeserved cultural prominence, turned complex human identity into a repetitive checklist for trauma autopsies, and replaced genuine artistic friction with a walled garden of smoothed-out consumption.
It is a thorough, aggressive dismantling of the modern literary apparatus from a very specific, uncompromising philosophical...
So why should you, the listener, care about this deep dive? Well, the next time you walk into a bookstore, take a moment to really look at the tables, look at the displays, notice the neon covers.
Notice the endless mythological retellings.
Yes. Notice the silhouettes of women facing away from World War II fighter planes. Ask yourself, are you seeing the ideologically closed-off, aesthetically cloned, walled garden of smoothed-out consumption that this creator describes, or are you seeing something else?
A democratization of...
Right. Are you seeing a vibrant democratization of stories that simply weren't allowed to be told in the male-dominated exclusionary eras of Bellow, Roth, and Amos? The answer likely depends on what you believe the fundamental purpose of literature to be: a mirror or a window.
And that leads to one final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up. The creator argues passionately that great literature must present an alien moral system that you do not immediately recognize yourself. He demands the heavy barbell.
So what's the takeaway?
Consider the broader implication. If we only consume media that validates our pre-existing, whether that media is a progressive identity narrative about trauma or a comforting, neatly resolved historical romance, are we losing our cultural ability to handle friction in the...
Oh, wow.
If our books no longer challenge us with the unfamiliar and the uncomfortable, are we training our minds to reject anything in reality that doesn't feel intact?
It's a heavy question, and it brings us right back to the beginning. The industry data says fiction is healthier than ever. The cultural critic says it's dead. We're left staring into the murky waters, trying to figure out if what we're reading is actually making us stronger or just keeping us comfortable.